A Chinese electric sedan just landed in Canada that accelerates faster than a Porsche 911, costs less than half what you'd expect, and has no rear window. The automotive establishment spent years dismissing Chinese EVs as cheap knockoffs. That dismissal just became very expensive. But here is what makes this different from every other China is coming story you have heard before. The AVATR 12 is not trying to undercut anyone on price. It is not some quirky experiment testing whether anyone will bite. This is a full-blooded luxury performance sedan engineered to go head-to-head with BMW, Mercedes, and Tesla at their own game. And in several critical areas, it is already winning. For decades, the perception of Chinese automobiles followed a predictable pattern. They were seen as derivative, utilitarian, acceptable for emerging markets, but nowhere near ready for the discerning buyers of Europe or North America. That narrative worked because it was mostly true. Early Chinese cars borrowed heavily from existing designs, prioritized low cost over refinement, and rarely ventured beyond basic transportation. But something shifted over the past 5 years that Western observers completely missed while it was happening. China did not just enter the electric vehicle market, it rebuilt its entire automotive industry around electrification from the ground up. While traditional automakers in Detroit, Stuttgart, and Munich were trying to figure out how to adapt century-old manufacturing processes and supply chains to accommodate batteries and electric motors, Chinese manufacturers were designing everything fresh. No legacy factories to retool. No dealer networks demanding gasoline models. No engineering teams emotionally invested in combustion engine heritage. No union agreements built around engine assembly lines that suddenly needed to make something else entirely. The AVATR 12 emerged from that environment. It is a joint venture between Changan, one of China's oldest automakers, CATL, the battery manufacturer that supplies nearly everyone including Tesla, and Huawei, a company that knows a few things about integrating software and hardware. When those three companies decided to build a luxury electric sedan, they had access to resources and expertise that would cost a Western automaker billions to assemble. And what they created looks nothing like a car designed by committee trying to protect existing market share. The electric vehicle transition was always going to create a reset moment for the automotive industry, when the architecture of what makes a car move changes completely. The advantages built up over decades of refining combustion engines do not automatically carry forward. New players can enter with no baggage and no institutional pressure to make the new thing look like an evolution of the old thing. The AVATR 12 is proof that some of those new players took full advantage. Pay attention to this next part because it explains everything about where car design is heading. The exterior throws out the traditional luxury sedan playbook entirely. There is no imposing grille because there is no engine to cool. The front end is smooth and sculpted, dominated by ultra-thin LED headlights that stretch across the nose like precision cuts. At night, they give the car an almost alien appearance. It looks like it arrived from a future timeline rather than a different continent. The roofline flows in one continuous arc from the windshield all the way to the tail, creating a fastback silhouette that prioritizes aerodynamics over the formal upright stance you would find on a traditional German sedan. And then there is the rear, where the designers made a decision that sounds absurd until you actually see it. They removed the rear window completely. Instead of glass, a camera system feeds live video to screens inside the cabin. Yeah, you read that right. No rear window. When you first hear about that, it registers as a gimmick. But when you see the car in person, the smooth, uninterrupted rear profile makes every other sedan look like it is carrying design elements from decades past. Simply because that is how it has always been done. You cannot pull that off with a gasoline car. You need the rear window for visibility around the exhaust layout and engine cooling. With a fully electric architecture, you start from zero constraints. And the camera feed is wider angle, works better in low light, and does not get obstructed by passengers. It is one of those solutions that sounds worse on paper but is actually better in practice. At just over 5 meters long with a 3-meter wheelbase, the AVATR 12 matches the Mercedes EQE and exceeds the BMW 5 Series in size. But because electric vehicle architecture allows for different weight distribution and packaging, it does not feel heavy or cumbersome. It sits low and wide with enormous wheels pushed out to the corners, giving it a stance that suggests performance rather than executive transportation. Frameless doors, muscular rear haunches. body surfacing that catches light in ways that make the car look like it is in motion even when parked. This is what happens when designers are not constrained by the need to make the new model look like an evolution of the previous one. There is no heritage to protect, no brand DNA committee demanding that the grille shape remain recognizable across generations. Just a clean sheet and a question. What should this thing look like if we forget everything we think we know? But the exterior is just the setup. Step inside and the departure from convention gets even more aggressive. Stretching across the entire width of the dashboard is a single continuous display measuring close to 35 inches. Not multiple screens trying to look integrated. One seamless panel running from the left side of the cabin to the right. Navigation, speed, media, vehicle information, all of it rendered through one unified interface that feels more like consumer electronics than traditional automotive design. Below that sits a large central touchscreen running Huawei's operating system. If you have ever used a flagship Huawei phone and appreciated how fluid and responsive it felt, that same experience has been scaled up and embedded into the center console. Climate controls, driving modes, navigation, media, everything flows through an interface that responds instantly and actually makes sense. Voice commands work the way you hope they will, instead of the way they usually do. You say what you want, the car does it. No repeating yourself 3 times while the system tries to figure out if you said navigate or activate. And if you've ever screamed at a car infotainment system while trying to change the temperature, you know how low that bar has been set by legacy automakers. Huawei apparently just looked at what BMW and Mercedes had been shipping and said they could do better than that in their sleep. Based on this system, they were not wrong. The car receives over-the-air software updates, which means it does not stay frozen at whatever version shipped from the factory. It evolves. It gains features over time the way your phone does. The seats are wrapped in premium leather with heating, ventilation, and massage functions across all positions. Not just the front seats, all of them. That 3-meter wheelbase creates rear legroom that makes long trips genuinely comfortable rather than something passengers tolerate. The panoramic glass roof floods the cabin with natural light, making the interior feel even more spacious than the measurements suggest. Sitting in the back of the AVATR 12, you start wondering whether this car is competing with the Mercedes E-Class or whether it is quietly aiming higher at the S-Class. And this is where things get really interesting, because the interior and the design, that is the appetizer. The dual-motor all-wheel drive configuration pumps out 578 horsepower. Torque sits around 650 Newton meters. 0 to 60 miles per hour happens in 3.9 seconds. Let that number breathe for a second. 3.9 seconds in a full-size luxury sedan with massage seats and a dashboard that spans nearly 3 feet. That's not competitive sedan performance. That's supercar acceleration wearing leather upholstery and carrying 4 adults in comfort. The Porsche Taycan hits similar numbers, but you are paying north of $100,000 for that privilege. The Tesla Model S Plaid goes faster, but it costs significantly more and feels like a tech product rather than a luxury vehicle. The AVATR 12 delivers that level of performance while still maintaining the refinement and presence of a proper executive sedan. So how about the range? Actually impressive. The battery pack is a 94.5 kilowatt-hour unit built by CATL, the same company supplying cells to Tesla, BMW, and nearly every other major electric vehicle manufacturer globally. The car runs an 800-volt electrical architecture, and that matters more than it might sound. Most electric vehicles operate on 400-volt systems. Doubling that voltage means charging speeds that actually make electric vehicles practical for people who do not want to plan their lives around charging stations. You can add hundreds of kilometers of range in the time it takes to grab coffee and use the restroom. Not theoretical marketing claims. Real-world capability built into the hardware. Total range hits around 700 kilometers under standard testing conditions. In practical terms, that's Toronto to Montreal with range to spare. No range anxiety, just drive. But raw performance only tells half the story. What's happening beneath all that speed is where things get wild. The AVATR 12 carries one of the most sophisticated driver assistance systems in any production vehicle. Multiple cameras, radar sensors, and 4 separate lidar units work together through Huawei ADS. LiDAR works by firing laser pulses in every direction and measuring how long the pulses take to bounce back, creating a precise, real-time, three-dimensional map of everything around the vehicle. One LiDAR unit gives good coverage. 4 LiDAR units means the car has essentially 0 blind spots. It knows where every vehicle is, where pedestrians are, where lane markings are, and where construction cones are, all of it mapped and tracked continuously. The system handles highway driving assistance, automatic lane changes, and intelligent parking. All of it is executed with a smoothness and confidence that makes it feel less like a driver aid and more like an experienced TO pilot who actually knows what they are doing. Most driver assistance systems on Western vehicles use cameras and radar alone. Tesla famously ditched LiDAR entirely, betting that cameras could handle everything. Huawei went the opposite direction and loaded this car with 4 LiDAR units, plus cameras and radar. The redundancy means the system has multiple ways to confirm what it is seeing before making any decision. When you have nearly 600 horsepower available the instant you press the accelerator, having that level of computational awareness watching the road alongside you is not a luxury feature. It is exactly what you want. Now here's where the conversation shifts from impressive to how is this even possible? Take everything described so far, the design that looks like it arrived from a decade in the future, the Huawei software that actually works the way software should, the quad LiDAR setup, the 800-volt architecture, the premium interior with massage functions and that massive seamless display, acceleration under 4 seconds that embarrasses dedicated sports sedans. Imagine a German or American manufacturer building that exact car. What would it cost? You would be looking at a price tag somewhere north of $80,000 to $100,000 minimum, probably more for the fully loaded configuration. The AVATR 12 starts at roughly $37,000 in its home market. The top trim with everything included sits around $59,000. That is for quad LiDAR, for massage seats in all positions, for the full Huawei technology suite, and for performance that makes a Porsche Taycan owner do a double take. Sound crazy? It gets better. That pricing reflects the Chinese domestic market. Bringing any vehicle into Canada involves import tariffs, regulatory compliance, local distribution networks, and after-sales infrastructure, so all of that adds up. The final number for a North American buyer would definitely be higher. But the underlying point stands regardless of what the eventual sticker price becomes. When a manufacturer can deliver this level of technology for this kind of base cost, it resets expectations around what a car at any given price point should offer. And that is what is keeping established luxury brands up at night. You can feel the shift happening in real time. 5 years ago, suggesting that a Chinese luxury electric sedan could stand as a credible alternative to BMW, Mercedes, and Tesla would have sounded delusional. Today, you can walk through the AVATR 12 specification sheet line by line and watch it match or exceed those established players in category after category. Design language, interior technology, performance metrics, driver assistance capability, range, charging speed, all of it. But here's the detail that everyone missed. This is not an outlier, it is a pattern. The AVATR 12 is part of a wave that includes the NIO ET7, the Zeekr 001, the Xpeng P7, and a dozen other models that most people outside China have never heard of. Each one brings serious engineering, legitimate performance credentials, and price points that make traditional luxury manufacturers extremely uncomfortable. The speed at which this is happening should not be underestimated. 3 years ago, most of these brands did not exist in any meaningful form. Now they are producing vehicles that compete directly with nameplates that have spent a century building their reputations. That is not incremental progress. That is a complete reshuffling of who gets to play at the top table. These vehicles are not imitating what already exists. They are building something that feels native to the electric era rather than adapted to it. Every design choice, from the deleted rear window to the flat floor to the instant torque delivery, flows naturally from electric architecture rather than fighting against it. That is what has established manufacturers worried. It is not that one Chinese company built one impressive car. The entire approach is better suited to what customers actually want from an electric luxury vehicle. Legacy automakers are trying to preserve brand identity developed over decades while adapting to a completely different powertrain. That is like renovating a house while someone else builds a brand new one next door with better materials, better layout, and a lower mortgage. The standard response to competition has always been to lean on heritage. BMW has been perfecting driving dynamics since 1916. Mercedes invented the automobile. Porsche represents decades of racing pedigree. But heritage arguments only work when the competition is playing the same game. When someone shows up with a different approach that delivers comparable results at a fraction of the price, saying we have been doing this longer starts sounding less like confidence and more like a company trying to justify its margins. The automotive industry has always been somewhat protected by massive capital requirements, complex distribution networks, and the importance of brand heritage. Those barriers have not disappeared, but they matter less than they used to. Manufacturing expertise can be acquired or partnered for. Distribution networks can be built surprisingly quickly when demand exists. And brand heritage means less to buyers who care more about what the car does today than what the badge represented 30 years ago. The AVATR 12 coming to Canada represents the first wave of this competition reaching Western markets in a serious way. Not as a curiosity, but as a legitimate alternative you could walk into a showroom and actually consider purchasing. That changes the conversation entirely. For years, premium electric vehicles meant Tesla or expensive European offerings that still felt somewhat transitional. Now you are looking at a market where a vehicle with quad lidar, 578 horsepower, Huawei's technology suite, and luxury credentials becomes a realistic option. That forces every manufacturer in this space to reconsider their pricing, their feature sets, and what they are actually offering for the money. What happens when buyers start asking why a similarly equipped German sedan costs 40% more? What happens when the technology inside a Chinese EV feels more advanced and more intuitive than what you get from brands that have been building luxury cars for generations? Those are not hypothetical questions anymore. People shopping in this segment are about to face them head-on. The premium EV segment 5 years from now will include brands that most people cannot name today. The vehicles that define what luxury and performance mean in an electric context might not come from the companies that defined those terms in the combustion era. What seemed impossible 5 years ago is now sitting in showrooms. What seems unlikely today might be standard 3 years from now. The question is not whether the established order will respond. They are already pouring billions into electric platforms and new technology. The question is whether they can move fast enough, and whether their responses will be held back by the very heritage and established practices that made them successful in the first place. New players do not carry that weight. They are building for the market as it exists now and as it will exist tomorrow, and the AVATR 12 is what happens when that advantage gets fully leveraged. The automotive landscape is shifting faster than anyone expected. What looked like a settled hierarchy just a few years ago now appears vulnerable in ways nobody would have predicted. The premium sedan segment is about to get very interesting. And when a car like this exists at this price point with this capability, the old explanations for why things cost what they cost stop making sense. The future of automotive luxury is being written right now, and it is being written by companies that nobody was paying attention to until it was already happening. If you want to see how another Chinese EV is shaking up a completely different segment, that breakdown is on screen now, and if this is the kind of deep dive you want more of, hit subscribe. I have one coming next week on the brand that might be the biggest threat of all, and trust me, you have not heard of them yet.